Here begins the second part of my Pencast conversation with Mr. Tony Smith, CBE, former Director General of the UK Border Force, now Managing Director of Fortinus Global and Chair of the International Border Management and Technologies Association, or IBMATA. I can imagine. And yeah, your leadership by example, your willingness to be in the trenches, you having been in the trenches, I'm sure bought you a lot of credit with the people you were whose leave you were canceling to bring them back and put them to work. You're talking about a job there that is not just customs and immigration and all of its complexity, but also a diplomatic role, security and intelligence role, no doubt, law enforcement role. Your coordination of these different elements and your facility to know the people involved and to liaise with them, to build a team with them is most impressive. And also that, it's somewhat old-fashioned nowadays to talk about passion for country and public service. And yet that is absolutely the core of what it sounds like, the job that you did and the job that your peers and colleagues did to make 2012 a huge success. That we need that. We need that passion for country. We need that absolute sense of public service. And that's, it's great to hear. It really is great to hear. Are there any behind the scenes dramas or near misses that you can talk about in the 2012 backstory? You're in the behind the scenes, as you say. Anything behind the curtain that happened or even an amusing event that sticks in your mind?
Well, they're in my book, so I think I can legitimately talk about things that are in my book. There obviously are things that I can't talk about, but there are quite plenty of stories. I think perhaps the most interesting one for listeners is like when you're making a judgment call as to whether someone should be given a permission to come into your country or not. How you manage the different forces on each shoulder. Some of the very high profile cases we had, it wasn't an Olympic related issue, but Mike Tyson, after he was convicted for rape in America and served his term, wanted to come over and fight an exhibition match. I had to decide, someone had to decide whether or not, because, that's an indictable offence that would exclude you from coming here normally. But is there grounds to waive that? And we had protests outside the Home Office from both camps. We had Women Against Rape marching up and down Whitehall saying you can't let this bloke in, it's a terrible idea. And then we had the boxing fraternity on the back pages saying this is the greatest thing that could ever happen. It's going to help kids in poor areas, for want to get off the streets and into boxing. It's a really tough call. You can't win. There's no right or wrong answer. And a lot of these decisions do go political and they go up to the Home Secretary. You have to give me your best and honest advice and say, I had a lot of cases like that during the Olympics where, I did have certain authorities to decide whether someone should or should not be admitted to the games. As Gold Commander, that was my brief, but every Monday there was somebody would call me into their office and at higher grade than me, to say that was the wrong decision, Tony, you shouldn't have done that. And I could then simply say, well, look, here's the gold book. You be gold, right? Here's the list of cases today. You tell me what we're going to do with them. And that usually scared them off because you have to have someone that's got the authorities, and there's plenty of people that will second guess you. But, if you want to be a strong leader, you've really got to nail down your authorities, and your decision doesn't have to be right. It just has to be reasonable. You just have to record your thought processes. So on the one hand, I understand there'll be people disappointed if we were to let this chap in, and for these reasons. The other, but, what is the threat? What is the risk to my country for this chap? Is he going to actually cause any damage by coming over here? Is he going to rape anybody while he's here? Is he going to be, this is my reasoning, is that I think we should let him in. And we can keep an eye on him and make sure he goes back and make it clear that he's got to behave himself. But he did, and it went really well. Now, that's not to say it was the right decision. Other people say, well, you still shouldn't have done because it was a terrible example of to set about who we let. There's always going to be, but you have to be sure that you are empowered to make that decision, and secondly, record your thought processes in writing in your decision. I've still got my decision logs here in the cupboard. 10 years later, where I've written down, just on a form, I had a form to fill out. What's the issue? What's my decision? Why is my so that if I were called into court in 3 years' time to explain myself, I could say, well, this was my thinking, Your Honour, at the time. That's why I took that decision. That's what I learned about all this. So it is about stepping up and, taking it on your shoulders and saying, yes, it's me. And B, being able to justify what you did after the event. That's even harder, I think, quite often, because there are always plenty of naysayers. So that's my advice to anybody is, look, be bold, have the courage of your convictions if you're going into these sorts of roles, but make sure you set out very, very clearly. And I did about 12 or 13 submissions to Theresa May saying, look, this is what gold means. This is what you're going to allow me to do. Right? I'm not going to phone you up every Sunday afternoon when you're at a Conservative tea party somewhere, to ask you what you think. You are empowering me. You have to trust me. If you don't trust me, don't give me the job and give it to someone else who you do trust. No, Tony, I trust you. Of course, sometimes I didn't feel that way when I came in the following morning and something had gone wrong. You had to incur the why did you let that person in? Or whatever. But anyway, it's all history now. But it was a fascinating experience, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Well, the interesting thing too is that on the one hand, they undoubtedly feel they need to criticize because one needs in the political sphere to voice one's opinion and take stands and so on. On the other hand, they were perhaps secretly, perhaps openly, very grateful to you for being the person at whom the buck stopped. You were willing to say, here's what I'm doing. Here's why I'm doing it. Get over it, right? This is my thinking. And as you say, you don't like my decision process. Here's the gold. Take it, and I think that probably, someone with the power of their convictions willing to say, I'm making this decision. Here's the decision. And I think it's a brilliant observation to say it doesn't have to be right in that heat of the moment, but it has to be reasonable. That is a wonderful way to approach very tricky problems for which there is no one right answer, and there will always be critics. So that's extremely helpful. We've been talking about 40 years of public service, but I mean, this is just sort of the beginning of your career. You've current and fast forward, you've moved on from public service to Fortinus and IBMATA. So let's look at, after having received high praise from Prime Minister David Cameron and then Home Secretary, soon to be Prime Minister Theresa May. Many people in your position would have rested on their ample bed of laurels, but for you, it was just sort of the beginning of new careers in the private sector and in the NGO space as managing director of Fortinus Global, and as founder and chair of IBMATA. Tell us a bit about Fortinus Global. What is it? What does it do, and your role there, and how it meshes with your background?
Yeah, so from my story that I think I built up quite a very significant bank of knowledge and experience of border management in different countries, which was in the tank really when I retired from government service. And I still had quite a lot of energy. I was only 60 years of age when I retired, and still felt reasonably. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting around watching daytime TV and pottering around in my garden, or even, trolling around the golf course, which I'm not very good at anyway. So, and the phone started ringing, basically. It wasn't sort of preconceived idea, but the phone started ringing saying, hey, Tony, how are you? What are you up to? Would you mind, flying out to, Miami to chair a conference for us on international border security. We'll pay you, your flight and put you in a nice hotel. And of course it was my hobby. So why would I say no? So, I very quickly got involved in the conference circuit, in this area. There are a lot of different companies that manage, border management conference section, but I wasn't really a player at that time. I was more of a participant, but I did get appointed to chair. And what I learned was that there's a huge community out there, an international community of experts in border management, both in the public sector and the private sector, who really find it quite hard to to communicate with one another. There isn't really a platform for them to, so you can use LinkedIn, or, you might be able to build a contact here or there, hand out a business card. But, what struck me, because we started exploring some quite interesting themes, like integrated border management, some of the questions you've been asking me in this interview. I mean, is it a good idea to have a single border agency, or should we be looking at different models? And we'd run workshops. And at the end of the conference, after a couple of days, I said, Tony, this has been absolutely brilliant. What's next? Huh. And I would say, well, I don't know. I'm going home. I'm going home now. Tell me what you're doing.
Not golf. Yeah.
But it's clear. And people came to me from that community. Some of them wanting niche consultancy advice. They were developing products and said, look, can we hire you? We'd really quite like to hire you because we think we've got a really good technology that can help clear passengers through borders. But we don't know anything about borders, really. Would you mind? Well, in order to hire me, I mean, I really needed my own company. So I set up Fortinus Global Limited with my daughter, actually, just the two of us. And these two people to form a limited company. She was between jobs, but she was more of a businesswoman. I was never a businessman. And she would keep me in check and made sure that I didn't take on anything that I wasn't being well paid for. And so the consultancy business began with Fortinus Global Limited. And then as civil servants rolled off the line here, many were of like mind to me. They weren't also not ready to they were expert, but a lewd amount of expertise, be it on forgery or on policy, on events, who were interested in not retiring completely, but perhaps doing a bit of work here and there. So, as people did that, they came on my line, and I put them on my company website, and, you can look on there now and you'll see lots of different faces there who are all associates of mine. So if we are asked to pull a big team together to walk towards a particular problem, whatever that might be, Los Angeles 28 Olympics, if they're looking for people that have been around the block on that and, might want, then, we're available for hire, if you like. And we do quite well, and we get contracts. We find we get contracts with governments, as well as with private sector companies, mainly about strategy, direction, development of border businesses. Lots and lots of big companies are running their own border teams now. But they don't get any training. I mean, they just sort of appointed, you're going to be running our border section, but they don't even know very much about how a border works, like in the country they're in, let alone worldwide. So I think that bank of knowledge served us well in setting up Fortinus Global, but I wanted to do more than that. It's not about making money or building a big company. We're a very small company. I mean, it was more about how can I help people that are following in my footsteps behind me, who are still serving in government. How can I pass on advice to them? And that's where IBMATA came from. So we're really lucky because we get very senior officials from US CBP, Canada, UK, EU, Australia. We've managed to persuade them to join IBMATA. We don't charge them anything for that, but we encourage them to come to our events, to write articles in our magazines, which is an online free publication for border geeks who want to read it, which gives you the very latest. So the latest example, we just got back from Prague. We were invited to chair an event there, host an event there by the Czechia Ministry of Home Affairs. They found out about it, said, would you please come here? Bring all of your IBMATA family with you. We will take you on a tour of our airport where we'll show you what we're doing in customs. And, we were able to attract, European Border Agency were there, the European Commission were there, Frontex were there, EU LEAS, a lot of the big EU institutions that are responsible for development of immigration and border policy in the EU all came along, all made it. We even had the Ukrainian border guard, which was quite poignant, really.
Wow.
That he turned up in uniform, and we had a minute's silence for his fallen comrades on the Ukrainian border, of course, and I learned a lot about what's going on the Eastern Front with Russia right now. It's quite scary. But I always learn something new, but lots and lots of, weaponization of migrants and drone attacks. And these are guys who are in the front line of all that are having to manage that. And then over on the sort of Western border with us, because we're not in the EU anymore, all these new, programs being brought in where you're going to have to give your fingerprints, biometric requirements to cross between the UK and France, which we've never had before. And how do we do that without completely disrupting our tourist flows across that border, which means I'm coming back over to Canada and the US shortly. to have another look at some of the Nexus lanes and some of the Sentry lanes and just pass on knowledge about how it's done there. I don't mean to say they have to copy that, but I think there's a huge market and a huge desire really for people to learn more, whether they're in the private sector or the public sector, about how borders work and the nuances, and is there best practice? And there certainly is best practice in different countries. But, people say to me, well, which is the best border in the world? Well, that's not really a level playing field. If you're going to pick any border to be in charge of, someone said to me, well, Tony, there's a 3-year job there. Go and run that border. I'd pick Australia because it's miles from anywhere. You can only get there by air. It's surrounded by crocodiles. It's like a completely different ballgame to what you'll see in the US with the Mexican border and some of the problems we see here with the small boat crossings from France. So there is no sort of simple answer, but there are principles at play, things that we have developed over the years, like how well do your agencies get along together? Have you got integrated border management? How good are you at pushing the border out and checking people and stuff before it arrives at the frontier, which means you can get it through more quick? How good are your identity, biometrics, data, getting data, accurate data in time to make informed risk assessment? Those are the sorts of measures that you would put in place when judging where gaps might be at a border, rather than, oh, well, this one's better than that one. It's quite complicated, but it's really quite interesting for quite a bunch of people who've joined IBMATA are really quite interested in this and do contribute to our magazine, do come to our events. And we're coming out to Miami in June. We got an event in Miami, 4th to the 6th of June, and the head of the CBP is coming to open it for us. We've got one of the ministers from the Caribbean coming. Lots of opportunity. They're going to take us on a tour around the ports, show us how they do cruise ship clearance and, interdiction. It's really an eye-opener for our members coming from different. I've got people coming from Singapore, people coming from Europe. We come together every so often, maybe not all the time, 4 or 5 months or so, to different parts of the world. And it's we call it the family. We call it the IBMATA family because it feels like family. You meet people you haven't seen for a while when you sort of shake hands and give them a hug and how are you? And, and you go and have a beer maybe or something in the evenings. And so, we've created, if you like, this sort of, this bubble of people that's growing, that is not really in it for the money, more in it for the interest in the topic, the subject matter, and we stick very much to our brief. We don't get into cyber security, we don't get into sort of broader policing issues or home affairs or justice issues. We stick to borders, immigration, customs, security. We found that is about the right area for us. We don't want to go in and start talking about things we're not expert in, and that. Because of that, we quite often get pulled into other discussions where there is a broader conversation where I might get pulled in to say, well, Tony, there's a border element to this security problem we've got. Can you come and advise on the border bits? And I'll stay within my swim lane on that and say, well, that's what I do for the border bits of this. But for what you do in terms of, intelligence data beyond that is for somebody else to work out.
IBMATA has been long on my radar. I have a confession to make about it. For listeners, by the way, if who don't know, IBMATA stands for the International Border Management and Technologies Association. And I have to admit, Tony, that I have been scanning your mouthwatering events over the last couple of years. And the speakers list, the guest list that you have, which I think, again, most customs aficionados would die to hear, have been an important source of ideas for me, for people to interview on this podcast. So it's very, very exciting. And as you say, 4 to 6 June, Miami, then November in Manila, if I'm not mistaken. Are there themes that sort of key themes that happen in each, for each of the conferences? And if so, what is the Miami theme and what's Manila?
Yeah,
it's too early to say yet.
That is a really good question. I mean, we didn't really start off with any themes, but they've certainly emerged. So we do tend to revert to similar sorts of themes. I mean, the main one for Miami is customs and cargo, in particular, how technology is pervading inspections at the US border and how artificial intelligence is being used. Increasingly to identify harmful products that might be coming into the port of Miami or into the US border. And, an example is, I took this to the Home Office in the UK and said, look, do you want to send someone? They always interested in what we're up to. But they said, well, what we're really quite interested in, Tony, is cargo. Because now we're not in the EU anymore. There's a pressure to do more checks on cargo than we used to. And actually, we haven't really focused on that as much as we have on people and passengers and, biometric passports and so on. So they want to come over and they're going to be presenting, the bones of their future cargo strategy in the UK Border Force at our event in IBMATA, because they see that as a really good opportunity to go out to a wider audience and say, well, this is what we're thinking of doing. Is this on the right lines? This is our strategy. Learn what the other countries are doing. Hear from industry about how technology is being deployed in different countries. So they get a benefit from coming along because they learn, and they are also able to broaden their audience, if you like, when they come to consultation about, bidding for some money, maybe to build a new cargo system in the UK. And that's and that's really what it is. So but there are sort of a fairly wide range of things. And sadly, we only have 2 days, and we can't really, we could speak for weeks and weeks about this. So we have to be quite circumspect about how long we give speakers and what we focus on. And we do have to drill down. So like the one in Prague, if you look at we've got our next border management today coming out shortly, actually. I've just finished editing that. That's going to tell you an awful lot about what's going on in the EU. So if you're really interested in EU borders, we've got articles from Frontex, EU Commission, EU, lots. If you want anything you ever wanted to know about what's happening in EU borders right now and where they're going, then read that. But that might not be interest to everybody. Particularly when you're talking about customs inspections and cargo, because, they've got the external EU border, but they don't have any borders in customs borders within the EU. So this is going to be quite different, and so we will change the focus in Miami to look much more and serve that sort of audience about how we can, move around. And then when we get to Manila, it's a different problem again. It's a source country for human trafficking and human slavery, and so we will be working with some of the UN groups, on the anti-smuggling groups, on how can we, stop people being exploited from source countries, and what can source countries do about that, and what can third. So we've already got interest from US. UK, other, receiving countries of irregular migration to come to Manila to talk about that. So we have to sort of keep a close eye on what's going on. So we don't usually do the agenda for these things until at least 6 months out. And quite often we find as we go through, we even then have to refine it based on what speakers we've got and what topics we've got. And quite often we end up doing a workshop, a pre-conference workshop, if you want to come. So we're going to have one in Manila on that very topic, with the Bali group, who are primarily their purpose is to, discourage the smuggling of people for exploitation from the Far East into Western Europe, and how border agencies can behave more differently when they encounter such bits, etc. So we run working groups either with them, or we did one in South Africa with IOM on the challenges facing Africa. Where we bring people in to do specific topics by way of a workshop. Not everyone comes to those, but if it's your bag, well, you can register for the pre-conference workshop as well as the event itself. And the model kind of works. We've been going 7 years now, and so we've refined it each time. But we think it's working really, really well now, and that people are getting what they want out of it. But we're always looking for feedback from our members to see, well, what is it? What's around the corner? And you can bet your bottom dollar something will be around the corner. We just don't quite know what it is yet.
This concludes the second part of my Pencast conversation with Mr. Tony Smith, CBE, former Director General of the UK Border Force, now Managing Director of Fortinus Global and founding Chair of IBMATA. Join us soon for the next episode of our talk. Thank you.